Well, 2023 saw a slowdown in the pace of EV sales, putting a speed bump in the Biden administration's goal of 50% of all new vehicle sales to be EVs by 2030. While high interest rates and elevated prices may be dimming consumer interest in fully electric vehicles, there are other challenges left to tackle as electrification's push continues. Here to discuss is Deloitte Automotive Research Lead Ryan Robinson. Ryan, thank you for joining us this morning. So as we look at this EV transition, we keep hearing about some of the demand slipping, but what's at the root cause of it? Is it just about inflation, or what else is at play?
Well, hi, Rochelle. Thanks for having me. So we think that there's an elephant in the room here, and that's vehicle affordability. And it's affecting the demand or the momentum towards electric vehicle sales. In our latest 2024 global automotive consumer study that's releasing today, as a matter of fact, through our work at CES, one of the questions that we ask, and we've asked for many years, is what type of engine consumers would most like in their next vehicle. And the study results suggest that there is a bit of a rebound in the number of consumers that are wanting what you might call a more traditional internal combustion engine. So last year, the percentage of consumers that were telling us that they want an ICE vehicle was about 58%. Now it's about 67%. So there is a bit of that lift, and we think that's got a lot to do, as I said, with affordability. When you consider where consumers, the US consumers, are at the moment, we've got about 43% of consumers that are telling us that they wouldn't be able to afford a major unexpected expense in the next 3 months. You've got half of consumers telling us that they're concerned about the level of savings that they have. And concern about credit card debt in our studies has risen, from about 23% where we were this time last year to about 30% on the last study pulse, which was just a couple of weeks ago. So, there definitely is an affordability issue out there, and we think it's a huge concern for the industry going forward.
So Ryan, how big is the gap between what people are willing to pay for an EV based on your survey versus what we're currently seeing by some of these EV makers out there?
Yeah, so overall in our study, we asked consumers just what they're expecting to pay for their next vehicle. So just overall kind of transaction price. And about 8 out of 10 consumers are telling us that they're expecting to pay less than $50,000 for their next vehicle. When you bring it down to what consumers are actually concerned about and where the rubber meets the road for them is monthly payment. And again, you could argue that the concern is at least as great, or even the situation is greater when you factor in the impact of elevated interest rates right now. You've got 84% of consumers telling us that they're expecting to pay less than $600 a month. And when you consider where average monthly payments are right now, a lot of people out there, a lot of people that are tabulating these numbers on a month-to-month basis are clocking in, well over $700. So there is this kind of Grand Canyon chasm opening up between what consumers are expecting to pay and the reality of market conditions when they go to buy their next vehicle.
And are you finding that's the same situation with hybrids and ICE vehicles as well, or is it really a sort of more of a distortion when it comes to EVs?
There's definitely a distortion when it comes to EVs in particular. There is obviously some concern around the premium that manufacturers are expecting consumers to pay for the added technology in a hybrid vehicle. But when you look at our study results, the level of interest that consumers are telling us they have in hybrids easily outpaces full battery electric vehicles, and has done for many years that we've been asking this question in our study. So hybrids are definitely, we think, part of the solution along the road to electrification. There are many ways that we think the industry can come good on some of the goals for decarbonization that have been set. And hybrid vehicles and technology definitely have a place in that solution set.
So Ryan, I mean, even looking at your survey, the number of people who said they would even switch brands in the efforts of trying something new on top of it being an EV, well, how does that measure up then with the policy, the Biden administration trying to push for more people to get in these EVs, to get more manufacturers to create them? But then, as you mentioned, that chasm there between affordability and people who, if you can't afford, one emergency expense, buying an EV isn't going to be top of your list. What should policymakers be doing to rethink this?
Well, definitely. We think it's a conversation that doesn't just involve policymakers. It is a collaborative conversation that has to happen or continue to happen between, the different levels of government and the automakers and all of the other stakeholders that are involved in that process of the journey towards electrification. We do think you can't get away from the issue of affordability. I mean, just the idea that we don't have a lot of automakers with full ranges of electrified vehicles even now that would be viable solutions for consumers to consider as their next vehicle, is one of the driving factors for some of the fluctuations that we see in that consumer loyalty or brand loyalty issue that you mentioned. So right now, if you account for consumer switching between brands within brand families, we've got about 45% of consumers in the US telling us that they're intending on going outside of the brand family of vehicle that they currently drive for their next vehicle. And that should be a real concern for automakers and indeed the whole industry going forward. So a combination of certainly the incentives structures that we have are helping. It's not necessarily a long-term strategy. We think that there's a lot more work to be done on taking cost out of the manufacturing process to really attack that affordability issue, particularly with EVs. And once we can get the cost down for EVs, start allowing consumers to kind of sit at that intersection of what they want to drive, which is SUVs and pickup trucks and and getting access to electrification, but doing it at a price point that they're willing or increasingly able to pay. That's the kind of balance that we got to strike going forward.
And it does explain why we see that high interest in EVs, but we don't actually see people buying them. And then you have car makers sort of stuck in the middle, trying to manage how that translates into demand. I appreciate you taking the time to break that down for us. Ryan Robinson, thank you so much.